Welcome back to my workbench. This video is about gloves, and while I'm making this right midsummer, it's a subject worth noting because there's a lot of videos out there by people breathlessly saying that these gloves are the best and you must use them. Well, generally those are people who've been given free product and really don't know what they're talking about. So what I'm going to do here, first off, I'm not sponsored by anyone. Never have been, probably never will. So all of the products that I'm going to show you here, I own and have used, sometimes for years. Now, why do we need gloves? Well, it gets cold, and really, as a photographer, you don't want gloves. They're the worst possible thing that can get between you and your camera, except maybe for a neck strap. These tiny little buttons are hard enough to deal with without any gloves, but once you put on a layer between you and the buttons, it becomes more and more and more difficult, particularly if you're dealing with buttons that need a half press. The tactile feedback, once you start wearing gloves, is reduced and can be almost zero. Now, sometimes people say, well, if you're using these a lot in cold weather, just stick on some of those little furniture pads, that stop your furniture from scraping on the floor. Cut them up and glue them onto your buttons, but it's really not a solution. There's better ways of doing things. It's best just to leave the buttons as they are. So what we're going to look at are three different types of hand covering. The first is liner gloves, which are a very thin, almost flimsy material, and they come in two different types. There are just plain liner gloves, and then there are liner gloves with little magnetic strips sewn into them. Touch gloves, or tactile gloves they're called. And that enables you to use a LCD screen, and most modern cameras have touch screens in them. And like, for example, even your phone has a touch screen, and so plain gloves have a very limited use in the modern world. They come in handy if you just want to keep warm, but in the real world of wildlife photography, you really need some touch-enabled liner gloves in order to use all of the functions on your camera. Now, I must admit, they really don't work. And what do I mean by that? Well, yes, they do work. Like if I put this on now and started swiping my phone, it would work beautifully. Well, that's because it's nice and warm today. It's about 23 degrees. It's fine and sunny and warm. But once you get below zero, and let me just highlight this. When I'm talking about warm weather, I'm talking about 10 degrees Celsius or above. When I'm talking about cool weather, I'm talking about zero freezing point of water up to 10 degrees Celsius. When I'm talking about cold weather, I'm talking about from zero down to about minus 15. And when I'm talking about extreme cold, anything below minus 15, I put into the extreme cold category, all the way down to minus 50. You can get into temperatures minus 60, but your camera just won't work, so there's no really point having photography gloves in minus 60. Your camera will struggle and fight, but it will still work at minus 40, minus 50 maybe if you're careful. But once you get below that, it's not going to work. So those are the levels: warm, cool, cold, and extreme cold. Oh, and one other factor is wind chill. Wind chill is real. When you're looking at temperatures, when it mentions wind chill, that's the figure you should go with. It won't affect your camera. It won't affect any equipment. It won't affect your car or anything like that, but it will affect your body. Wind chill will affect your body, but it won't affect machinery. So just to clarify, when I say that touch liner gloves don't work, well, they do work in warm weather. But what happens is that as the weather gets colder and colder and colder, the gloves still work, but your touchscreen doesn't. It becomes less and less sensitive. You'll have people you see them on their ratings on Amazon or whatever going on, oh, these don't work, they don't work. Well, they do work. It's just that the touchscreen will not operate properly once you hit 0 degrees. And the colder it gets after that, the less efficient you're going to be pressing really hard on your screen just to get any sort of reaction using touch gloves. To the point where generally, if I must use a touch screen, I'll just take my gloves off quickly just to operate it. And even then, with bare fingers, you'll find that touch screens aren't really that responsive at all, and eventually they just shut down. They won't work. So we need gloves to protect our hands from the cold. Preferably, we will try and get away without using gloves at all for as long as possible. And when we do, we use as little as possible on our hands just to make it easier to deal with our cameras. So we look at the first layer there is the liner glove, and then what you would probably do is you'd put another glove over the top of that. Now this is a Joe Basic normal glove with 4 fingers and a thumb. These are pretty much hopeless dealing with camera buttons. They're great if you're sitting on a snowmobile or sitting around a camp when it's really cold. Great for handling, stoves and pots and things like that. But when it comes to dealing with cameras, there's just no tactile feedback. They're not precise. You can maybe get away with it, but particularly if you've got liner gloves as well, which you should, these are fairly useless. So what you need is the very expensive photography glove. So what's the difference between a normal glove and a photography glove? Well, as you can see, they have little tips that flip back to enable you to use your fingers on your camera. These 3 fingers normally wouldn't be used, or maybe if you've just got a special button on the front of your camera. And your left hand, that would certainly have flip tips as well, but you would probably even get away with not using your left hand at all most of the time. So that's what a photography glove is, and that gives people excuse to charge you enormous amounts of money. However, they really are good. They really do work. Now, a third type of glove is the trigger mitt, and the trigger mitt has 3 fingers together, your index finger separate and your thumb separate. They don't normally have flip tops, and they're designed for hunters who are using rifles or similar weapons. I have seen photographers use them over in Europe, but I find them a bit too bulky, and again, there's the problem with the tactile feel. And then the third type of glove is the mitt. And the mitt has all of your fingers together, which is warmer than a normal finger type glove like this. It's warmer, but of course, as far as tactility goes, they're absolutely hopeless. You can't even really swing an axe with one of these. They really cripple your movement, and you can't use them with a camera. So enter the photography mitt. Let me just grab one over here. Here's an example of a photography mitt. This is a Heat Company mitt. It has a zip that allows your fingers to come through. It has a flip on the thumb as well, and that gives you full access. You would usually, if you need to be using one of these, you'd usually be using a liner glove as well to protect your fingers while they're sticking out of the mitt. Another example is this by Vallerret, this mitt. Now, when I bought these mitts, and these are fantastic mitts by the way, they're very warm, there was no way to get your thumb out. It was all very well and good to get your fingers out, so what I've done, I've actually cut it and sewn it up so that I can stick my thumb out. Now, you don't need to do that because Vallerret now make the same mitt with thumb access. Okay, so those are our 3 types of, or 4 types. There's liner glove, there's the, here's another one. This is another flip top style. You'll find these in hunting stores and so forth with a little mitt cover. Now these are the worst of both worlds. It's a mitt, so you can't use your camera, and they're so tight and small that you can't get a liner glove in them. If you buy maybe a larger size, but if you're someone like me with a large hand, you're kind of stuck. So I tried these, and they're so damn tight. I gave up. You can't really use them. You need to pay the extra money for photography gloves. This is the Heat Company glove, set up as they recommend. It has one of their liner gloves, and then you have the mitt over the top. They also have a third layer, which is like an over mitt for the mitt, which is kind of a bit of overkill as far as I'm concerned, but this is the basic setup. And you think, oh, look, that's really cool. You know, you've got all your fingers and so forth. But this isn't the warmest setup. No matter what they say or what other people say, they say, oh, these are the warmest gloves, blah, blah. It's impossible. You can't, because you've got all of your fingers sticking out with just a liner glove on. And that's fine for a few minutes. But if you're shooting in minus 30 or minus 40, this gets very cold very quickly. And you're going to be continually putting your fingers back into the mitt, and after an hour or so, it's just too cold. This just does not work. You might be able to get away with sneaking your fingers back in and just having your index and your thumb out, but again, those most important two digits there, they're going to get fairly cold quite quickly. So let me show you an alternative that actually works. Check out this little beastie. This is your Vallerret photography glove with the tips exposed, and inside of there I've got my liner glove. That's beautifully warm. It's only the tips of your fingers that are exposed here, and what you can do using their mitt, you now have protected fingers, and it's possible to stay much warmer for much longer, particularly in minus 30, minus 40 degrees. And particularly with their new mitts where this is actually done properly, which they lock back, this will allow you to shoot for hours in extreme cold. Whereas the Heat Company mitts, they're much thinner, they're not as warm, and this opening here this is the largest mitt that they make. It's the biggest they make, and it's still kind of too tight for me. I purchased their product using their sizing chart, and both the liner gloves and the mitt was much too small. I did query them when I sent the order in. I said, look, I'm a bit suspicious, but they just sent it to me, and I had to send them back and get the larger size, and I ended up paying for the courier. So I really don't recommend these unless you're just in cold weather. That's down to about 15 Celsius. Anything below that, these will not work properly. They won't work as well as the Vallerret combination with a liner. Their warmest glove, this one's the Ipsuit, I think it is. I think they make a different one now, but it's their coldest weather glove, and then their mitt on top. It's actually thicker. You can actually feel that it's much thicker and warmer than the Heat Company. So what I recommend is the Vallerret setup with liner gloves, with the Ipsuit glove and their mitt, and that'll keep you toasty warm sitting in that hide in freezing cold weather. Now another thing you can do, if you're exposing your fingers a lot, you can throw into the mix some hand warmers. They do work, but when you're in extreme cold, putting one into your mitt isn't going to cut the cheese. You really need to put in 4 or 5 of these, get them activated, and that's enough just to add some warmth to your fingertips. You'll notice that a lot of these gloves, for example, the Heat Company here, they have a zipped pocket at the back to put in these chemical warmers. It's kind of stupid. It doesn't work. It might help a little because it warms up the blood on the back of your hand before it goes to your fingertips. But and even the Vallerret have them on the glove here. but they're pretty useless. You really need the warmth right down on your fingertips, not on the back of your hand. You can put them in there as well, but you still need something right down on your fingertips that you can wrap your fingers around. Another product which I really like, I've been using recently, are electric hand warmers. And again, the Vallerret mitt has enough room to take one of these, and even a couple of extra ones of those if you want. And that'll enable you to heat your hands up after they've gotten cold. Because the secret to success is being able to warm your hands up, not just put them back in the mitt and hopefully eventually they might warm up from body heat. You actually need, when you're dealing with -30, -40, you need to actively have something working on your fingertips to warm them up. And that's why we use the little hotties or similar products, or electric hand warmers, or a combination of both. So that's my take on gloves. I've been using this system now for a few years, and it's the only one that really works for me. The Heat Company gloves, they're fine, you know, when you're just dealing with cold weather above -10. In fact, these are probably just as good by themselves, the Vallerret gloves, compared to this, because you've got the same product. You've got a liner and insulated fingertips. If you want to go ahead and get some of these, that's fine. You do what you want. But in my opinion, if you're wanting to stay warm in a hide when you're sitting still, it's a lot more difficult than when you're running around or hiking and using walking poles and stuff like that. When you're sitting in a hide, you're sitting on a log, you're waiting for something to come out and it's snowing or it's -30 or 40, you really need extreme warmth protection. And the only way to do that is by using a decent insulated mitt, which is the Vallerret, with a glove, plus the liner, plus electronic or chemical heating. It's the only way to go. And even then, you still may get cold hands on occasion. Stand by for feet and toes, coming up in the next vid.